What is the one kind of dinner you can serve your family that feeds an army, is a one-pan meal, somehow you manage to get a vegetable and a starch and protein all in the same bite, and it makes really great leftovers? It's a casserole! Today I'm showing you my 5 best casseroles. It's one of my favorite ways to get an easy, affordable, delicious dinner on the table. I'm going to show you how to make my chicken broccoli rice casserole. We're going to make a king ranch chicken casserole, a cottage pie with beef. We are going to make a confetti chicken casserole, and then lastly a tuna noodle casserole. Let's get cooking. So the first dish we're going to make is a cheesy chicken broccoli and rice casserole. And this is one of my favorites because it's the easiest. It's so easy. We're going to put dry rice, raw chicken, fresh broccoli into a casserole dish, cover it with a soup, and then the oven takes care of all the work. We'll cover it with foil, it'll cook, everything will be perfect, and then we'll bring it out, top it with cheese, pop it back in to melt, and it's ready. The only cooking we're going to do is going to be this cream of chicken soup. And you can actually use a canned cream of chicken soup if you prefer. And all of these casserole recipes, all 5 of them, what we're gonna walk you through today, are linked below. If you wanna hop right over to the website and just read ahead, get started, pick your favorite. And if you want, I'm gonna make this with fresh onion and garlic. I've got 3 tablespoons of butter going into the saucepan. I'm gonna make this with fresh onion and garlic, but you can definitely use granulated. So this recipe calls for a half a cup of onion. Calls for a half of an onion, and it calls for 3 cloves of garlic. And the equivalent of that for dried spices is 1/2 of an onion equals 1 teaspoon of onion powder. And then 3 cloves of garlic equals 1 teaspoon of garlic powder. And another tip for you, if you want to use canned soup, you can absolutely do that, y'all. Save your time. If time is not something you've got today, then skip this step. You by no means need to go. I'm kind of making it the long version for you, right? So you can see the most involved way to pull it together. The only important thing is that the liquid ratio matches up because we need enough liquid to cook that rice. To start this soup, we need to add some flour. That's 3 tablespoons of flour to this butter. And then stir it up, and what we're making is a very light roux. And this is just a really delicious way to thicken this homemade quick soup. Now I'm going to add about a cup of that broth, of our total broth, and just whisk it up until everything is broken up and nice and even. Onion and garlic going in. You can add that onion garlic earlier if you want. I just find that I get a little bit more of an even whisk if I add it at this stage. And the heat that I have this on is actually just medium low. I don't want anything to cook too fast or burn. So give that a stir and let it cook down just a touch. Add just a little bit more broth. If you pre-measure your broth out ahead of time, it was 3 cups total. You can just kind of add a little bit as you go, right? Without worrying if you're adding too much at the end. While our sauce is bubbling, I'm gonna go ahead and get started on cutting up our chicken. So I have 1.5 pounds of chicken breast here, and I'm gonna cut it into about 1/2-inch pieces. And I'm cutting it into those small pieces because the whole idea of a casserole is that you just scoop it and serve it. You don't have to cut anything. You can serve it with just a fork or a spoon. You don't have to serve it with a knife. And so we want to pre-cut everything into bite-sized pieces. All right, our sauce is simmering, soup, sauce, whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to go ahead and add the rest of our seasonings. We have some sea salt. It's a good amount of sea salt. I think it's 2.5 teaspoons, pretty sure. Some ground black pepper, enough until your heart's happy. About 1/2 teaspoon is probably what I called for. And then about 1 teaspoon of dried thyme. And that helps bring just a really fun, savory flavor to the mix. Give all that a whisk, and then we're going to add 2 cups. We're gonna add 2 cups of milk or cream, 1/2 and 1/2, full fat coconut milk if you're looking for dairy free, whatever you've got on hand, some sort of milk to make this sauce extra creamy. Alrighty, we're ready to assemble our casserole. So in here I've got our chopped up chicken, to which I'm going to add 1.5 cups of dried rice. If you really want to be a good student, you would pre-rinse your dry rice, but I don't have time for that. I'm also going to add 12 ounces of broccoli, and y'all, I'm just going to do broccoli florets from the bag. Might as well. If you want to save a penny, then definitely get the heads of broccoli. And I'm just going to use my hands to break up some of these larger pieces so that, again, they're bite-sized pieces. We're going to pour our soup sauce cream of chicken. Is it hot? It's not bad. Over our ingredients. It's going to be full, which is what you want, because we want to have enough liquid in there, again, to cook that rice and absorb all the moisture of the chicken and the broccoli that it sets off. And then we're going to cover with foil and bake it at 375 for 50 minutes. Number 2 casserole that we're making is King Ranch chicken casserole. This is a family favorite around my house. It's packed with veggies, it's packed with cheese, chicken, and tortillas. What more could you want? The first thing we're going to do is we are going to, because this recipe calls for 2 red bell peppers, and that's where the majority of our veggies are coming from. And you don't just put raw red bell peppers into a casserole dish, because nobody really wants to bite into that. We want to saute them and get them nice and soft first. So we're going to start our stove, a little saucepan, get the heat on medium to high heat, add some olive oil, and then we're going to start sauteing the peppers, onion, and garlic together. Name of the game in casseroles is bite-sized everything goes into the dish. I'm going to put this in the skillet. Alrighty, so to chop up this jalapeno, I'm going to show you a trick that I use to cut the seeds out. So I just cut it in half, lengthwise, just like that. And then what I'm going to use is a grapefruit spoon. So it's got a little bit of a serrated edge. It's what you use to scoop the grapefruit flesh out. And this is a great thing to use to scrape the membrane and the seeds out of your jalapeno, so that you only are adding the outside part of the pepper into the dish, so it's not quite as spicy. Let's scrape away. I'm just going to give this pepper a super quick chop, and then it goes in with our onions and peppers and garlic. Next up, we're going to add about 14.5 ounces of canned tomatoes, and I'm going to give that a toss around. The liquid in the canned tomatoes is going to help us lift up any of that really yummy char on the bottom of the pan. 2 cups of chicken broth. 1 cup of heavy cream. You could absolutely substitute a dairy-free milk. I would use full-fat coconut milk, so you get a very similar consistency. Give that a stir. Then we're going to add a 1/4 cup of flour. This is a gluten-free King Arthur 1-for-1 flour that I like to use personally in the kitchen. It works great. If you are not worried about gluten-free, use your regular flour. It'll work out great. I'm just going to sprinkle this across the top. And I'm going to swap this for a whisk really quickly to make sure that there are no flour clumps, but this will help thicken our gravy for this luscious casserole. Okay, now we're going to just add our spices into this sauce. I've got 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper, 1 teaspoon of sea salt, 2 tablespoons of chili powder, which really gives this sauce some lovely depth, and then 1 teaspoon of ground cumin. And then whisk that up. It's time to assemble our King Ranch casserole. So the first thing I'm going to do in this adorable casserole dish, which is actually on the cover of my most recent book, Cook Once Dinner Fix, and actually you can get a pork version of this casserole in that same book if you want to try it with pork instead of chicken. So I've just had a little olive oil on the bottom of this pan, because the first layer is going to be our tortillas. This recipe calls for around 12, I'm using white corn tortillas. Don't overthink it. You can use any corn tortillas you find. If you actually prefer flour, you could make this with flour tortillas also. And sometimes casserole dishes, you'll notice that I got almost to the edge with 1 tortilla. So to fill in the gap, I just broke my tortillas in half and I put them on the other side. Just like that. And we're going to make 2 big layers in this dish. So I've got the tortillas, Then I'm going to put half of the chicken down next. And then we're going to put about half of the gravy on top. I'm going to use a ladle to hopefully keep it pretty tidy. But look how nice and thick that is. Last layer is going to be some shredded cheese. This is just a mixed shredded white and yellow. Use whichever cheese you prefer. Grand total of 3 cups of shredded cheese. Half of it goes on top of that layer, and then rinse and repeat. All right, so this one gets covered with foil also. 350 degrees for 35 minutes is what we're gonna bake it at covered, and then at the very end, we'll pull this foil off and we'll put it under the broiler for 3 minutes just to get that cheese nice and bubbly and delicious. The next casserole we're going to make is one of my favorites. It's a cottage pie. It is so nourishing and so warming and made with really easy fresh ingredients. So what we've got here is 2 pounds of ground beef. I'm actually making mine with leftover mashed potatoes. A cottage pie is essentially seasoned ground beef as the bottom of the dish, and then you put mashed potatoes on top, and then that's it. Bake it all together. It is so good. So we're gonna get started. I've got 2 pounds of fresh ground beef that I'm going to add. The fun thing about this dish is the casserole dish that we're going to bake it in is also the one that will brown the beef in. So I'm gonna add that over, over medium-ish heat. I'm gonna use my little swirly potato masher to mash it up. And I just want this to crumble. And once that's nice and crumbled, we will add in our seasonings, some red wine, some broth, get it nice and simmering and bubbly and flavorful. If you're looking to make just this casserole ahead, you could go through all of these steps I'm walking you through right now and then skip the oven part at the end. Just wrap it up and stick it in the fridge and let it hang out there until you're ready to serve it that day, and then put it in the oven for its final bake. Alrighty, so our ground beef is ready. We're going to add 6 ounces of tomato paste in here. And what we're going to do is it's going to take this very average ground beef and turn it into the, I don't mean to oversell it, but it's a really magical tasting filling. It's delicious. Now we're going to add all of our spices. So I have a 1/4 teaspoon of ground black pepper, 1 teaspoon ground onion powder, a teaspoon of garlic powder, a teaspoon of sea salt, and then a tablespoon of Italian seasoning, dried Italian seasoning. While that's all in there, stir it up until it has a really nice, even consistency. And I like to keep the heat on because it helps toast those spices. Now we're gonna add in 1 cup of red wine and a 1/2 cup of broth. I wanna bring the whole thing to a simmer so we can cook off some of that wine and let it go for about 5 minutes. I'm just stirring this around to keep it from overburning on the bottom while everything boils and simmers off. If you don't want to cook with red wine, you can absolutely do that. What you would do instead is substitute. So the 1 cup of red wine, you would substitute for about 3/4 cup water and then a 1/4 cup of balsamic vinegar. And that will provide still the body and the depth we're looking for. Slightly different flavor, but it's a great thing to use if you're looking for a swap. Okay, we are ready to add our 10 ounces of frozen peas and carrots. And I'm just gonna stir it around, turn off the heat. We don't need it anymore. Stir that around until the peas and carrots are evenly incorporated. The time in the oven is what's going to cook the peas and carrots, which is why we can just put them in and be done. Okay, so I have our leftover mashed potatoes, which is another time-saving tip, and I have warmed it a little bit in the microwave. Mashed potatoes leftover tend to be it's like Play-Doh almost, is what we're dealing with. So I'm actually going to just spread this over the top and then smooth it out, and then it's ready for the oven. At 350 degrees for 30 minutes, and when it comes out, I'm gonna garnish with some fresh parsley just to give it a little touch of something fresh and green, but then it's ready. All right, this next casserole we're making is actually one of the most popular dishes out of Cook Once, Eat All Week, which is my second book that also meal prep bestseller. And you can find links directly to that book and Cook Once Dinner Fix below. This is called Confetti Chicken Casserole, and it's called Confetti Chicken Casserole because it looks like confetti. All the vegetables we chop up, it just has such beautiful color. And I tell you, my children, kids and adults, raving fans. And if you are looking for a winner, I feel like kids are the most honest with you about when a dish is actually good, and this one is their favorite. So I'm starting off, I have 6 slices of bacon. Oh, I'm just gonna use my hands. I have 6 slices of bacon that I'm just going to put into a skillet over medium-high heat, and I just wanna cook these until they're crispy. And what I'm going to do is, this is a quick time-saving tip for you, or actually a budget tip for you. Instead of having another skillet going, because we're also going to saute our vegetables, we want to get the bell pepper and the onion and the kale and the garlic to wilt down a little bit. You could put that into another skillet right now and get those started to save on time, or to save on money. Instead of using oil to get those started, just use the bacon grease that you're about to render from this bacon to cook those. So I'm just going to work in a couple stages. So I'll let those crisp, wash my hands, and then we'll chop some veggies. Start chopping up our vegetables. We have 1 bell pepper, a whole red, purple, in my house, onion, and we're going to use 3 cloves of garlic and then a head of kale. This is the kind of kale I like. I call it dino kale in the house. It goes by a few different names. You can definitely use curly kale. Whatever you've got and whichever you prefer, it's going to cook down pretty well, so you won't notice it. If you've ever had raw kale, it can be a little tough to chew on. That's not going to be the case here. It's going to be really nice and soft and delicious and just kind of blend in with the other ingredients. Bacon comes out. Pour off the majority of this bacon grease. Alrighty, and then our pepper, onion, and garlic go into that skillet that we just used. And I'm just going to toss these around and saute, again, over medium-ish heat until they're just a little bit wilted. In our casserole dish, we have the shredded kale, also the shredded chicken off of that rotisserie chicken, to which we're going to add 2 cups of frozen corn, which is part of our fun confetti. We're going to add our peppers and onions, which we've sauteed lovingly in some bacon grease. A make-ahead tip for you, if you want to get a head start on the week, pre-saute your vegetables. Then you don't have to wait on this step to get everything done, ready to assemble. I'm going to add a teaspoon of salt and about 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of ground black pepper. And then the last ingredient is going to be a 1/4 cup of mayonnaise. And the mayo is actually what helps kind of marry everything together in this dish. You could stir all this together in a big old bowl and then transfer it into your casserole dish, but I say, why dirty another dish when you can just stir directly in this thing? So I'm gonna mix it all up, and then we'll put our final toppings on. Last but not least, a little bit of shredded cheese goes on top, 1/2 cup to 1 cup. You use however much you feel like. I would probably up that a little bit if you weren't looking at me right now. And then we have our crispy bacon. I'm just going to crumble this with my hands and sprinkle that as our final garnish. This is going to head into the oven, as is, 350 degrees for 30 minutes. And then when it comes out, we will garnish with a little green onion. For our 5th and final casserole we're making today is a tuna noodle casserole. I grew up on a tuna noodle casserole, and it was one of my favorite dishes in my childhood. And today we're just making it with a little bit of a healthier spin, and we're gonna make it as quick and easy as possible. So the first thing I've got going are my noodles. Now, the noodles, I'm gluten-free, and so the noodles that I cook with are gluten-free. Jovial brand makes one of my favorite kinds of gluten-free noodles. And their tagliatelle noodle is what we're looking for. So if you're not gluten-free, an egg noodle would be perfect. We're looking for a wide, thin noodle. And if you are, tagliatelle is about as close as I've gotten. Or if you can ever find an egg noodle, if you're watching this in the future and they make them, please use them. You could also definitely use either a fusilli, a rotini, another kind of shorter noodle would be fine. Any noodle you want would be great. This is just the one that's most like my childhood. So I'm boiling my noodles, and I have a couple tips for you. If you are scratching your head and you're like, my gluten-free spaghetti or noodles never turn out well, a couple quick tips for you. Number one is to make sure you boil them in almost twice as much water than you would a regular gluten-full noodle, right? These need a lot more water to release the starches without getting gummy. You also want to stir them as they cook to keep them from breaking up and keep them from sticking to one another. And then last thing you want to do is when you drain them, we're going to rinse them with cool water, and that is also going to help release some of that starch, and they're going to have a great noodle. So we're going to make our own cream of mushroom soup. So what I've got are a couple tablespoons of butter that I'm going to put into this little pot. Get that started. To which I'm going to add half of an onion, small onion, and about a clove of garlic. You could absolutely use granulated if you prefer. It's not going to hurt anything. The equivalent would be 1 teaspoon of onion and about a 1/4 teaspoon of garlic. And we're also going to add some sliced mushrooms. The mushrooms have cooked down a little bit, so we're ready to turn this into our cream of mushroom soup / gravy. I have 2 tablespoons of flour that I'm going to sprinkle over the top. I'm going to turn the heat down a little bit from medium high to a low medium. I'm just going to toss those mushrooms in the flour. I really just want the flour to soak up a lot of that butter, get a little toast on them, and then we will add half a cup of chicken broth, a teaspoon of sea salt, a 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper, and then 1 2/3 cup of milk. I'm using whole cow's milk here. You could definitely use really whatever milk you've got on hand is going to be fine. Give that a stir, let it come to a simmer so that all of the flour mixes in together. It'll start to thicken just a little bit. And then once we get to that point, I'll stir in my peas. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and drain my pasta and give it a quick rinse so those noodles don't stick together. Alrighty, our noodles are drained and cooked and rinsed with cool water. I'm actually just going to pour them right into our casserole dish. Noodles are in here, and I don't know that I've said this before, but that was 9 ounces of noodles that I used, dry noodles. So you can just, this is a very forgiving recipe. So if you happen to have 12 ounces or 10 or 11, they package all the noodle containers differently. It'll be fine. It'll work out great. So what I'm doing now is I have canned tuna that I'm going to use. And I'm just lightly flaking this canned tuna with a fork, twisting it a little bit so it easily comes out of the container. And I'm just pouring that right on top of my noodles. These are 5-ounce containers of tuna, and I like to buy mine tuna packed in water. If you're looking for a recommendation, that would be the one that I would grab. I usually look for line-caught tuna. Is usually a really great keyword if you're looking to support more sustainable ocean farming. Just giving it a really quick flake, and then it goes right in. You can also make this with fresh tuna and Cook One's Dinner Fix, which is my New York Times best-selling book. If you don't have a copy of it yet, what are you waiting for? Go grab it. It's amazing. But in Cook One's Dinner Fix, I show you how to use fresh tuna steaks. You enjoy fresh tuna steaks for your first meal, and then for the plan for leftovers, we use it to make a tuna noodle casserole, and it's extra delicious because it's made with fresh tuna. Okay, we have a cup of frozen peas, which are a must in tuna noodle casserole. It wouldn't be tuna noodle casserole without the frozen peas. And then lastly, we're going to pour our homemade cream of mushroom soup over the top. And if you would prefer to buy canned because that feels easier, I support that decision. You do you, boo. Now I'm just going to toss all of this up really lightly, kind of get the tuna mixed in. And then the last thing we're going to put is anywhere between 1 and 2 cups of fresh grated mozzarella cheese. Of course, I'm doing 2 cups. Have you met me? Spread it out a little bit. I still like to leave some of the edges to peek through. Then this goes into the oven at 350 degrees for 20 minutes. Everything's cooked. We just want to warm it all the way through. And that will make sure that your noodles are perfectly cooked, not too soft. It's going to be so good. I hope you found that helpful. It was a lot of fun for us, and we've got some really good eating to do. Don't forget, we have all 5 of these delicious casseroles linked for you below. The full recipes are there. And be sure to like and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a single video going forward.